A guest with me today. Her name is Weiting, and she is the founder of Open Room. Now, you're a co-founder, is that right?
Yes, I founded the company alongside my partner in life. So, my husband, he is on the engineering side, and I am on the rest of the non engineering, so business, partnerships, community building side.
That's amazing. So what inspired the creation of Open Room? Like where did this idea come from and how has it evolved over the last couple of years, I imagine?
When it first started, it was because I had dealt with a bad tenancy experience myself. So, when we look at my particular rental unit, I had originally rented out the property after I purchased it because I knew that eventually one day I would want to move back into it. So, the day that I asked my tenants to move out, gave them advance notice, they said, I'm not moving out and I'm also not going to pay rent anymore. So, we were down at about $35,000 in unpaid rent. And then we decided, you know what? We went to the LTV multiple times and we build software for a living. Let's go build something. And that's when it first started, where we started sharing our landlord and tenant board orders in Ontario into Open Room. We built a one page site, and then it took off because people kept telling each other. And then after they've gone to the tribunals or the courts, they would post it into Open Room, and that's where Open Room took off and media picked us up. And here we are today, launching more
Yeah.
things for the world.
I love it. That yeah, and I noticed it. I think it was on Globe and Mail or Toronto Star, one of the media channels. I was reading and it was talking about Open Room, and very early on in one of my Instagram reels or videos, I had actually mentioned that landlords and tenants should be like going to this website and understanding what the rights are. Now, what is it more a landlord platform or a tenant, or is it sort of a 50-50? Who are you basically supporting through this platform?
What we're trying to build here, Faisal, is a future of transparency in the rental ecosystem, but also connecting all players of the rental ecosystem. So that means landlords, tenants, housing providers, renters, property managers, developers, whoever that can get to that transparency and the connectedness in the ecosystem. That's who we're building for.
Okay, and is it a subscription model or is it an open, anybody can sort of log on and find out what's going on and find out who the bad landlords are, who the bad tenants are? Is it an open platform?
Right now, if you are an individual, you can go on to Openroom.ca. You do not need to pay anything to Openroom. You just go in there, you do a search on the name, the email address of either the landlord, so you can see bad faith evictions that they may have had or conducted in the past, or maintenance issues. And then if you're a landlord, a property manager, you'll go in there and see, does anybody have any unpaid rent, evictions that they have gone through in the past related to rentals? So from that perspective, you can do it for free. There's no cost to it, but you can pay an extra like $10 a month if you wanted to get more additional search results per each search you do.
Okay, that's great. So how would you describe the current state of landlord and tenant relations in Ontario specifically?
I'd say the relationship between the landlord and the tenant relationships right now in Ontario, it is dire. For the most part, the majority of tenants are really good. But as soon as you get to a dispute, then you have to go through the court system or the tribunal quasi court system. And that is really, really painful. So when it comes to statistics right now, inside Open Room, just based on the 10%-ish orders that we have across all of the landlord tribunal orders in Ontario specifically, we do operate across Canada, but mainly in Ontario. So with that, we're looking at unpaid rent of about $278 million right now that we're tracking over the last 4 years.
Wow, that is unbelievable. I had no idea it was that high of a number. And what are the challenges right now with for landlords? Is it still the wait times to get in front of the tribunal or collection? What would you say are the top three challenges that landlords are facing today?
Oh, okay. Top three. So first is I do want to caveat that the landlord and tenant board in Ontario specifically has gone down in terms of first response to get to a hearing date. So that's roughly looking at about 3 to 4 months because they have been prioritizing the L1 non-payment of rent. But then once you get to your hearing, then you get a court order or a tribunal decision, and then you have to queue to wait for the sheriff, and that time has increased. So while your hearing date to get to that first hearing date decreased, the full overall time frame, we're still looking at about 7 to 8 months. So time for eviction on that particular non-payment of rent issue is still particularly high and still a challenge. Not good enough. The second piece challenge is collection after you get an order with non-payment of rent. What do you do with it? And I'm still going through my own case right now of my former tenants. What do I do? So it's actually very fascinating to see, okay, Weiting, Open Room, I know people like Faisal, people who are collections agency, and I'm still having difficulty. How does someone normal who don't have all the collections or the connections in this industry to go do that? That is another issue. And then number three, I would say from a challenge perspective, is the large landlords and the small landlords. It's almost like people are pitting against each other. And we really need to start working together so that we can all treat tenants who are the customers with care and respect. That's a challenge. And everybody thinks it's like, oh, it's us versus them.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree with you. And now are you finding that the tenants have like, it can be argued that, a tenant files a complaint against the landlord and they're getting to the tribunal much faster and getting resolution to the matter much faster. Is there any truth to that, or is it the sheriff component that's taking the longer time frame as opposed to just getting to the tribunal? Like, is it an equal timeline?
The Landlord and Tenant Board in Ontario actually releases data on a quarterly basis around their metrics. But the thing is, from a tenant's perspective, if you are a tenant going after your landlord for maintenance, bad faith eviction, I'd say those are not top priority for the Landlord and Tenant Board, because they're right now trying to increase the time for the L1 non-payment of rent and for applications, right? So from a tenant perspective, there's the same frustration that it's not fast enough. I know that the board is trying to do more, trying to hire more adjudicators. So there is more stuff coming. It's just that it's, I would say, still the same story on the tenant side, that they're still waiting a long time to get to that justice.
Yeah, we're finding in our industry that, landlords, investors are shying away from making investments because of the nightmare stories that they're hearing. So what are your thoughts on that as an investor? And you've gone through a negative experience yourself. Has that made you stop and pause your future investments in real estate because of that experience? Or are you saying, okay, that's a one-off situation, I know better now, and here are the things I'm going to start doing in order to ensure that I don't put myself in a position where I'm having to go through collections and a bad tenancy agreement?
Yeah, Faisal, great question. Well, if I had more money and not running Open Room, because Open Room is a startup, I'm funding it by myself, right? With my partner, we're funding it on our own. So it's not like I have a whole bunch of money stashed away somewhere. And very honest to your listeners, we've only got one rental property. Originally, we were living in our condo and then we rented out the house. Now we're at the house, so we're renting out the condo, but we're very small ownership landlords. But to your question is, if I wasn't running Open Room and I had more cash flow or cash to invest in this, I would still do it, because I think one of the main issues in Ontario or in the rental business itself is that small ownership landlords are not educated about the rental ecosystem. And then they go in and they think this is passive income. Oh, it's so easy. No, it's not. And you don't understand the Landlord and Tenant Board. You don't understand the Residential Tenancies Act. And that's where we land in trouble. And that was particularly my issue, is that I was not well informed or educated about the rental ecosystem or the industry.
And so would you say that if you're a small investor just starting out, to have a property management company, or would you say just educate yourself first and know what you're getting yourself into? Like what's your recommendation to someone who's just calls you up and says, "Waiting, I'm thinking about buying a rental property." What are your thoughts?
I think that really depends. Okay. That depends on the individual, because if you are someone who is conscientious, you want to learn, and you have the time to go and learn it, okay, then go find the right resources, go and learn everything and do some things by trial and error. But if you're like I'm full-time working 12 hours a day and I have no time to learn this, I just have a whole bunch of cash laying around and I want to go invest it in investment property, I'd say then you should look at a good quality property management firm to try to do that for you. And of course, caveat, they're not all made equal. So of course, do your due diligence, have your consultations, and specify your goals before you go to a property management firm.
I was watching your Instagram reels and whatnot, and you've got a great page. There are lots of great information. We'll make sure we put your information on here to our followers to make sure they follow you. But you had a great sort of do's and don'ts type of thing posted not that long ago. So from that perspective, I'm a landlord. I'm interviewing tenants. And what I got out of your message was don't take anything for face value. Do your due diligence, verify the documents. So, what kind of things would you say a landlord should absolutely do when they get an application? What are the steps that a landlord should follow?
Faisal, that's like an 11-page screening checklist. But I'll just share some quick top tips that maybe people don't know about today. One is if they haven't already checked public records for things like eviction purposes, right? So if you go onto Openroom, you can search the name, the address, and see if there is anything that pops up. That is number one, because it's specifically related to rental history. Number two is that what I hear is people just making decisions off the cuff. Don't do that. Do a credit pull. And there are specific screening techniques or services that are out there. For example, singлекey.com is one of them, where a landlord could go in there, request a report straight from Equifax, from TransUnion, from even International Nova Credit. Pull it, see what you get from there. And then number three is there's a lot of fraud applications these days. So I'd say there are smart techniques to see, was a pay stub fabricated? Are you calling the right landlord? So don't call the current landlord. You want to call the previous, like the second previous landlord, so that they'll tell you the juicy, good details about what is happening. And of course, something that I got wind of, someone educated me on this, is if you're going to be vetting a tenant and you're calling a reference, say the wrong facts and see if they correct you on it.
Interesting.
Yes. And then if they correct you, then you know, they're actually real, potential to be real. But if they don't correct it and they're just like, yeah, that is the amount that they pay, when it's not actually the amount, then you know something's fishy.
Okay, and I was watching one of your reels, and I'm from Cambridge, Ontario, and you were talking
Yeah.
about somebody who rented a property in Cambridge and was full of mold, and the dishwasher had mold, and share that story with us if you don't mind. Just tell me a little bit about and what can a tenant do when they're stuck with a bad landlord, because we're not all about just
Yeah.
bad tenants here. There's bad landlords, and when you have a bad landlord as a tenant, what are your rights? And share maybe that story that happened in Cambridge with us.
Yeah, that specific story came on my radar when it was about a family, a mother with children, who wanted to rent out a space. They got a space in Cambridge, but then realized a little bit afterwards that there was mold everywhere. And then they had moved out into a friend's property, but then they still end up paying the utilities bills. First thing went to renters when they deal with a situation like this is do not stop paying rent, because you can always go back to the landlord and tenant board to get a rent abatement, which is a reduction in your rent. But do not just not pay, because you don't have the authority to do that. That's still the lawful amount that you have to pay. You don't want to end up in an eviction situation. Okay. And then from there, what I would say is that this is really concerning to me, because many of the small landlords or just landlords out there, the tone is that, oh, landlords have so much money. But the thing is, that's not always the case. There are very small ownership landlords who just own a couple of properties. And then we get this bad reputation from the media because they say, oh, you're all so rich and you don't care and you're like slumlords, right? I get it. I get it. Because of situations like this where the landlord didn't take care of their property and ended up with mold in the property and basically does not care about the tenants, then that makes a bad reputation for everybody else that is involved in the rental ecosystem.
That's great advice. And again, we've all been in situations on both sides of that coin. And I see that happening more and more now where you have that slumlord that just lets everything go. And then the tenants just stops paying the rent and then they've got a reason to kick them out, right? So great advice on don't stop paying, recover it at the time. And for landlords, of course, the screening process. So tell me a little bit more about Open Room. What's next for Open Room? Is it gonna go public? Are you gonna invite investors like me to come in and join you, or what's next?
Yeah. When we look at what are we doing next at Open Room, what we want to do is bring back confidence in the small scale landlords to bring back their properties onto the rental market. So, for example, Faisal, we've got my dad who doesn't want to rent out his property, his basement property anymore. He's got 2 units in there. He doesn't want to rent it out. Why? Because he was so traumatized by my experience when he was a immigrant. He is still an immigrant. He came to Canada back in 2000 and bought a property a few years later, always rented out his basement, and now he doesn't want to. So these are the most affordable units out there, and yet he doesn't want to rent it out. And you know very well that there are thousands and thousands of people that don't want to do it anymore. They're leaving the market, as you said earlier, right? So if we can bring back confidence and people saying that bad actions, you will be held accountable for it, such as unpaid rent or bad faith evictions, then we can bring back the confidence, bring out the supply. And what does that mean? That means that we can meet the demand on the rental side. And so eventually, what we hope to do is be part of the solution to the housing crisis. And when we talk about affordability, hopefully we can stabilize in the future.
And does Airbnb fall under the same tribunal for eviction? Can somebody say, I'm gonna rent a place for a month under the Airbnb and then just say, well, I'm a proper tenant now, I'm not moving out?
Okay, I have heard or seen actually when cases come in of that happening where a short-term rental then ends up being long-term rental. And it's not just Airbnb, but there are other short-term rental sites that have landed people in this situation. At a general fundamental level, you'd think it's common sense that it's not part of it, but somehow it does. And so you'd have to tread very carefully, make sure you have a legal representative with you. Um, because if you call the police, they're likely going to tell you this is a civil matter and you've got to go to the LTB, even if, as a landlord, you provided all sorts of documentation. We have seen an Airbnb case as well as another one that very recently that came across my radar.
Okay, so
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about student rentals now.
Okay.
We have homes, and we're a university, we're a sort of a bedroom town for universities and colleges here. Um, Mr. So-and-so comes in, rents a house for $3,000 a month, has 4 bedrooms in it, and rents it out to 8 students at $700 a bed.
Mm.
The landlord finds out that this is happening in their home. What can the landlord do at that point?
Okay, Faisal. So if I got this correctly, there is a rental property. Is this a property manager that went behind the landlord's back?
No, so somebody comes in and says, "Hey, I want to rent this house for my family.
Yes,
So here's first and last. I'm going to be the I'm going to be the tenant, but that person never actually moved in.
I
What they
see.
did is they're running a business. They're renting it for $3,000 a month and renting out 8 beds at $700 a month, and they're making the spread between their rent and what they're getting per bed. So what happens in this situation? Does the landlord have any recourse? Or does this fall under, well, these are guests in my home?
Oh, that is a very good question. And I have seen that come across. I'm not a legal representative, and I think that you're diving a little bit into the legalities of certain things. I'll just say that at the end of the day, the landlord can try to go to the landlord and tenant board for unauthorized occupancy, right? Because it's not actually the people who signed the lease that were on there, and plus the tenant isn't even on there, on in the property. So I think that that will fall under that. One of the N forms there. If not N5, N5 might be the form for this case. Okay, I
Okay.
have definitely seen it for the residents that actually then live there, who then technically it's like a sublease, if not, right? Or at the moment it would be
Mhm.
considered almost like a you leased out as
Right,
the like second landlord.
right,
Yeah, the
right.
tenant that becomes the landlord then leased it out to somebody else. Yeah, for those people it is extremely unfortunate because they're in a situation where, well, I did pay rent and I should be able to live here, but then they will be, or eventually will be, facing an eviction possibility.
Okay, and I've had a lot of landlords say to me, well, I've just rented a couple of rooms out, and so this is the owner now saying,
Yeah.
I've just rented a few rooms out to some students. I can get them out in 30 days. I want to put my house on the market. Does the student rental fall under the same tenancy laws as a family renting the home?
No, no. Why would students differ anything in comparison to a family, right? No, a student still has rights just as any tenant resident does. What I've heard, though, or what I've seen, is that the landlord will pretend to live at the property and claim it as, oh, we're sharing a bathroom, sharing a kitchen. And then that's where they could technically evict someone without, or within 30 days, or even no notice at all, because they would be then considered a roommate and not a tenant.
Okay. Yeah, because you find that people will have these side agreements and they think that side agreement will supersede the Ontario lease agreement. And for clarification, it does not. That's where it all
Right.
comes back down to. Yeah, we've seen that a lot. And I always, question the landlord. I'm like, where did you get this information from? Why do you think you could just give 30 days or 2 weeks notice and get this tenant out? Because you have an actual lease with these people. Oh, well, I put it in the agreement. Well, that certainly doesn't mean anything at that point.
Right. I mean, you can add all the addendum lease agreements or clauses as you want, but it is not going to supersede or override the Ontario Standard Lease and the Residential Tenancies Act. It just won't. And I think that type of landlord that you're referring to was the old me, where I was super uneducated, uninformed about certain things. To be honest, Faisal, I didn't even know that an LTB existed a few years ago. Okay.
Wow.
And then I spent time digging into this, and that's how we ended up building Open Room, because I went through it myself. But so many people, so many landlords don't know that it exists. And that's unfortunate. So that's what part of Open Room is trying to do, is advocate, but also educate the community about what's going on in the rental ecosystem. So as we ting and Open Room learns, the rest of our community, our followers of our newsletter, everybody learns with us.
And how many followers or members or subscribers do you have on Open Room now?
Okay, so on a monthly basis, we get very consistently over 32,000 people on the website every single month, conducting thousands of searches. But then from a newsletter perspective, if people want to learn with me, because I actually personally write the newsletters that I send out every 2 weeks, is that one. We're at about just over 15,000 people right now. We started the newsletter a year ago. And then Instagram, it's just some fun content that we post out there to 12,000 people.
That's great. So I come on to Openroom.ca, correct? And
Mm-hmm.
what does your dashboard offer me as a landlord? What does it offer me as a tenant to come onto your site?
Yeah, if you log into openroom.ca, you basically search for name, the address, and then you can actually see the exact court order or the tribunal decision that was shared with Openroom, or that we have retrieved from the courts. So you'll see it, you get to read it, and it'll tell you what's going on in there so that you can make a more informed decision on who you rent to and who you rent from.
Weiting, this has been great. Thank you so much for joining me today and enlightening us on what's happening in the landlord tenant side of things. And is there anything else you want to add to it before we sign off here today?
Yes, for your audience, if you've gone to the Landlord and Tenant Board or even across Canada, we'd love for you to share your orders with us, because we don't have everything. And then we can't report on the stats, the metrics that are really important to the rental ecosystem. If you can share with us, that'll help us build towards that transparency in the future. Thank you.
And how do we share it? Go on to openroom.ca. Is there a place to share it on that platform?
Oh, yes. So in the top right-hand corner, you'll see a upload court order button. Click it, send it in. You don't have to give us further information other than your email if you want to leave your email address with us in case we contact you for any discrepancies and such. So then you send it in for free and you can go from there.
Okay, we're gonna make sure we post all the links so that our followers can also join and get better informed. And thank you. Yes, go ahead.
There's one more thing is that if you've got a rental debt court order or tribunal decision, you can
Okay.
rely on open room. I want you to consider using open room to report it into the credit bureau as a collections item on the report. What does that do? It impacts the credit history. And in the future, if anybody pulls that Equifax report, right? So earlier we were talking about single key, is that if they pull it and that is a tenant that has that rental debt on it, you better believe that it will show up on their
Oh, that's
report.
fantastic. Is this something new? Because that did not exist a few years ago, or did it?
No, well, open room didn't exist a few years ago. We literally just started like 2.5 years
No,
ago.
I'm talking about the
Yeah.
reporting side of things.
Oh, yeah. The reporting side of rental debt into Equifax, it started half a year ago with Open Room, and we've got thousands of people using it today.
That's
Yes.
fantastic. That's really good to hear because we know that there are collections that happen and orders are given. Then, you go through the garnishing process and whatnot. And sometimes that can get circumvented, but when it's showing up on someone's credit, often a lender or another landlord wants to see that this has been resolved before and that might force those bad actors to actually take care of their debts, right?
Yes. I mean, not everybody cares about their report. And sometimes I look at it, it's like if they're not paying rent, maybe they don't care about their financials, right? But sometimes they do. Or later on in a couple of years, they're going to go for that mortgage, they're going to go for that loan, and then it hurts. And then you'll be able to get something back eventually, hopefully.
Yes, let's hope. Let's hope. And again, all of this hopefully will resolve the housing crisis. So hopefully we're putting a dent in that as well. And Weiting, once again, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. And the best of luck with Open Room. And I look forward to seeing your growth.
Thank you very much, Faisal, for having me on your show.
Thank you. My pleasure.